There are two buckets I want to show you. One is full of something most people rake up every autumn and throw straight in the trash. The other is foaming like a science experiment, all from a single spoonful of bread yeast. Between them, they cost about $1, and they quietly outwork the bag of fertilizer sitting in your garage right now. You will never find this combination on a store shelf, not because anyone banned it, because nobody can build a business selling you something that's almost free. So they sell you the bag instead, and let this stay a quiet little secret between the gardeners who already know. Today, you're going to be one of them. Stick with me to the end and you'll have the exact recipes, the season-long schedule, and the handful of small mistakes that quietly sink most people. That last part is the bit most guides skip entirely. Let me give you the whole idea up front so you're not waiting on me. The first bucket is a Korean method that wakes up the living crew already in your soil, the bacteria and fungi that feed your plants for you. The second is a homemade brew that feeds the plant directly, the way a good meal does. One works underground, one works above ground. And here's the part almost nobody gets right. Most gardeners try one or the other, get a so-so result, and quietly give up. The real trick, the thing this whole video is about, is running the two of them together, in the right order, across one full growing season. Do that, and the change in your plants is the kind you can watch happen week to week. Let's start with why two cheap things beat one expensive one. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Think about what a plant actually needs to thrive. It needs food, nitrogen, a little phosphorus, potassium, a handful of minerals. But it also needs a living world wrapped around its roots. In healthy ground, a plant never eats alone. It's surrounded by billions of bacteria and fine threads of fungi that pull nutrients out of the soil, hand them straight to the roots, and take a little plant sugar in return. That underground crew is doing half the work of feeding your garden, and you never once see them. Here's something that might surprise you. That rich, earthy smell you get from good garden soil, that clean after-the-rain smell, isn't really the dirt at all. It's a scent given off by some of those very microbes, living and busy. When your soil smells alive, it's because it literally is. And the trade going on down there is a remarkable thing. Those fungal threads reach far out into the soil, into tiny pockets the roots could never squeeze into, and bring back water and locked up minerals, then swap them to the plant for a little of its sugar. Build that network up, and your plant is effectively feeding from a patch of ground many times bigger than its own roots could ever reach. Now here's where a bag of fertilizer quietly lets you down over time. Synthetic feed gives the plant a fast, salty meal. The plant perks up for a couple of weeks, and it looks like a win. But that quick hit does nothing for the living crew underground. Lean on it too hard, season after season, and that crew actually thins out because you've taken away their job. So next spring you need the bag again, and the spring after that. You've been renting growth instead of building it. You've probably seen both kinds of garden in your life. The one that looks fine as long as the bags keep coming and goes pale and tired the year they stop. And the old garden, maybe a grandparent's, that just kept giving, year after year, on almost nothing, because the soil itself had quietly become rich and alive. That second kind is exactly what we're building toward here. The two buckets fix two different halves of that problem, and that's the whole secret. The first bucket, the Korean one, is all about the crew. It barely feeds the plant at all. What it does is repopulate your soil with living microbes, the way you'd reseed a thin, patchy lawn. You're not pouring in food, you're pouring in workers. The second bucket, the yeast brew, feeds the plant directly. Yeast is one of the most studied living things on Earth, and it turns out to be packed with things a plant can use. A whole spread of B vitamins, amino acids, trace minerals, and a couple of natural growth substances that plants respond to. You're handing the plant a balanced meal it can take up fast. So picture the two of them working at once. One bucket is building the workforce down in the soil. The other is delivering the groceries up top. underground and above ground at the same time, all season long. That is the lever, really two levers pulled together, behind the kind of jump you can see in your plants from one week to the next. Nothing mysterious about it, just two jobs getting done at once, when almost everyone only ever does one. Before I hand you the first recipe, you should know where it came from, because the story is half the reason it works the way it does. Back in 1991, a man in South Korea named Young-Sang Cho set out to build a farming system with one stubborn rule. It had to be cheap enough that any farmer, anywhere, could do it with whatever was already lying around them. Cho was no weekend hobbyist. He was a trained chemist who went on to earn a doctorate in plant pathology, the science of plant disease. His own father, Hankyu Cho, had founded an earlier movement called Korean natural farming, so this was, in a real sense, the family trade. Young-Sang Cho took those ideas, stripped them down, made them cheaper, and called the result JADAM. The name comes from a Korean phrase that means, roughly, people who resemble nature. Now here's the part that matters most. Cho could have patented every bit of this. He could have bottled it, slapped a brand on it, and sold it in a jug for a tidy profit. He chose not to. Instead, he published the entire method in a book, over 600 pages of it, backed by hundreds of references. And he gave the recipes away on purpose, so that no company could ever own them or lock them up. That is the real reason you've never seen this on a store shelf. It was never being hidden from you. It was set free, deliberately, by a man who decided that farmers shouldn't have to keep paying for what nature already does for nothing. So let's make his most famous brew. It's called JADAM Microbial Solution, JMS for short, and the whole batch costs you about the price of a single potato. Because a single potato is most of what's in it. Here's what you gather. A good handful of leaf mold. That's the dark, crumbly, sweet-smelling stuff you find under the fallen leaves in any old, undisturbed patch of woodland, or even under a mature tree in your own yard. That leaf mold is loaded with native microbes, already perfectly adapted to your local conditions. One quick word on gathering it. Take it from healthy, undisturbed ground, and only take a handful. Skip anywhere that gets sprayed or sits right beside a busy road. You're collecting life, so collect it from somewhere full of life. Then you need one boiled potato mashed. That's the food that wakes those microbes up and lets them multiply into the billions. A small spoonful of sea salt, which keeps the wrong organisms politely in check. And about a gallon of water. Rainwater if you've got it, and I'll come back to why your water matters far more than you'd think. You mash the boiled potato into the water until the whole thing turns cloudy. You take that handful of leaf mold, drop it into a mesh bag or an old clean sock, and let it steep in the potato water like one giant tea bag. And here's a small detail that sets the Korean method apart from the bubbling compost teas you may have seen. There's no air pump, no aerator, none of that. You just set the bucket somewhere out of direct sun and let it be. A day, 2 days, 3 at the very most. This is exactly where most people get nervous and quit, so let me tell you precisely what success looks like. Because you read this brew with your eyes and your nose, not with a calendar. What you're watching for is a layer of white, bubbly foam slowly creeping across the surface of the water. That foam is the microbes multiplying. It's the brew telling you it's alive and working. A good batch smells earthy and yeasty, a little sour, like bread dough or a forest floor after rain. That smell is the smell of success. When you get that, you've done it exactly right. What you do not want is rot. If the brew smells genuinely foul, like sewage, like rotten eggs, like something crawled in and died, that batch went the wrong way, and you simply pour it out and start over. No guilt. It cost you a potato. That one rule, a good batch foams and smells of bread, a bad batch smells of rot, is the single thing that separates the gardeners who succeed at this from the ones who give up too soon. Once that brew goes into your soil, those microbes get straight to work, breaking down old organic matter, unlocking minerals that were already sitting in your ground but locked away where roots couldn't reach them, and crowding out the kinds of organisms that cause root disease. You're not just adding life, you're putting that life to work on the food that's already there in your soil. And here's a handy trick. Once you've got a good batch going, you can save a cup of it to kickstart your next one, instead of foraging for fresh leaf mold every single time. A little of the living brew seeds the next batch. That's part of what people mean when they call this stuff self-replicating. And one last thing nobody tells you, this stuff is alive, which means it's on a clock. You use JMS fresh, within a day or so of that foam showing up, while the microbes are at their absolute peak. This is not a bottle you brew once and leave on a shelf all summer. It's a living thing, and like anything living, it's at its best when it's fresh. Now, I've taken everything we're covering today, the exact amounts, the timing, the smells to watch for, and the full season-long schedule we're about to get into, and I've put it all onto a single page you can print and keep right by the shed. Point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and it's yours. No charge, nothing to sign up for, no email to hand over. Just a clean one-page guide for the moment you're standing over the bucket and can't quite remember whether it was 1 spoon of salt or 2. Grab it now, then come right back, because the second brew is where this whole thing really starts to come together. Now for the second bucket, the one that costs about $1 and actually earns the name. The star here is plain baker's yeast, the very same packet or little jar you'd reach for to make a loaf of bread. A tablespoon of it costs you pennies. Call it $1 and you're rounding up generously. And that humble spoonful is doing far more than you'd guess. Here's the honest version of why yeast helps with none of the hype. Yeast cells are tiny, dense packages of useful stuff. Researchers who've studied them closely find they're rich in proteins and amino acids, a full spread of B vitamins, trace minerals, and a couple of natural growth substances, the kinds of compounds called auxins and cytokinins that plants use to push out new roots and shoots. When you feed a dilute yeast brew to your plants, you're handing them all those building blocks in a form they can take up quickly. Those amino acids especially are a head start. They save the plant some of the energy it would otherwise spend building them from scratch. It's not a trick. It's just a rich, gentle, fast-acting feed made from something already in your baking cupboard. Here's how you make it. Take about a quart of warm water. Warm, not hot, because water that's too hot will kill the yeast before it ever gets going. Stir in 1 tablespoon of baker's yeast and 2 tablespoons of sugar. That sugar is breakfast for the yeast. It wakes up, starts feeding, and within a few hours, you'll see it foam up and catch that familiar bread-rising smell. Let it sit somewhere warm for anywhere from 2 hours to half a day. Once it's foamy and fragrant, your starter is ready. Then you dilute it. And dilution is everything here, so please don't rush this part. Pour that whole quart of starter into about 5 gallons of water. That works out to roughly 1 part starter to 20 parts water. Too strong, and you'll do more harm than good. And I'll explain exactly why in just a few minutes. And here's the reassuring part. Unlike a bag of synthetic feed, this brew is gentle and forgiving. Get the dilution roughly right, and your plants are in no danger at all. It's food, not a chemical jolt. Much closer in spirit to compost than to a fertilizer spike. Now, while you're at it, you can turn this from a simple feed into something more complete by stirring in 3 cheap kitchen minerals. A tablespoon of wood ash, for potassium, that's the nutrient behind sturdy stems, good flowering, and solid fruit. A tablespoon of Epsom salt, which is magnesium, genuinely useful in gardens where the soil happens to run short on it. And a tablespoon of finely ground eggshell for a slow, steady trickle of calcium. And I do mean finely ground because a big chunk of shell will still be sitting there whole a year from now. One real word of caution on that wood ash, because it's the one ingredient here that can actually bite you. Wood ash is strongly alkaline. It pushes your soil's acidity in the wrong direction for certain plants. So keep this ash-enriched brew well away from anything that loves acid soil. Your blueberries, your azaleas, your rhododendrons, and skip it on potatoes, where sweeter soil tends to give you scabby skins. For your tomatoes, peppers, beans, squash, and leafy greens, it's a fine addition. For the acid lovers, you just make the very same brew without the ash. Same recipe, hold the ash, and everybody's happy. Notice what those three minerals are doing together: potassium, magnesium, and calcium. That's a trio most everyday plant food skips right past, focused as it is on the big three of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You're rounding out the meal with the quiet supporting players, the ones that help fruit set, keep leaves green, and keep cell walls strong. Water it in gently around the base of your plants, in the early morning or the cool of the evening, never in the full heat of midday. There's a real reason for the timing. In the cool hours, the water soaks down, and the roots drink it up calmly, instead of half of it flashing off in the sun while the plant is already stressed by the heat. You can also strain it well and use it as a light spray over the leaves for a quick pick-me-up, but soil drenching the roots is where it does its steadiest, longest-lasting work. And just like the first bucket, you use it fresh. So now you've got two brews in hand. One builds the underground crew, one feeds the plant. And here is exactly where almost every gardening video stops cold. Two recipes, good luck, see you next time. But two tools are not a system. The real value, the part genuinely worth staying for, is knowing when to reach for which one across a whole season. So let me walk you through it the way you'd actually live it, from bare ground in early spring to a full harvest basket in late summer. Stage 1 is before you've planted a single thing, early spring when the beds are still bare and the soil is just waking up. This is the moment for the microbial bucket, the JMS, and the moment to go in strong. Drench your beds with it, dilute it about 1 part brew to 10 parts water, and let those native microbes move into the soil and set up shop a good couple of weeks before your plants ever arrive. You're building the workforce first, so the ground is alive and ready the day the roots show up. Think of it as hiring all your staff before opening day. Stage 2 is transplanting, the day you actually move your seedlings out into the ground. And here is a detail worth the entire video, because this is the one place where the science is squarely on your side. When researchers and farmers have tracked what JMS reliably does, the clearest and best documented effect is faster root settlement after transplant. In plain words, plants drenched with this microbial brew get over the shock of being moved more quickly and put down new roots faster. So that is precisely when you reach for it. Water your seedlings in with diluted JMS on planting day itself. You're not crossing your fingers and hoping. You're using it at the exact moment it's actually known to do the most good. A gentle note for the very beginning: if you're raising seedlings indoors in trays, go easy. Those tiny plants want only the faintest, most diluted touch, if anything at all. Save the real drenching for when they're out in the bed with room to grow. Young seedlings are surprisingly easy to overwhelm with too much kindness. Stage 3 is the long stretch of growing, all those weeks when your plants are stacking on leaves and stems and really filling out. Now you alternate between the two. Every couple of weeks you rotate. A JMS drench 1 week to keep the soil's crew thriving, the yeast brew the next week to keep the plant well fed. Back and forth. Soil, then plant. Soil, then plant. Keep the workforce healthy and the groceries arriving, and your plant has everything it needs coming at it from both directions. Now, you might wonder why you don't just dump both into one bucket and pour it all at once, in half the trips. Here's why you keep them apart. Alternating lets you actually see which one your garden is responding to, and it keeps that strong, salty mineral mix from crowding the gentle microbes when they're just getting established. Soil 1 week, plant the next. It's simpler to follow, and it tells you more. Stage 4 is flowering and fruiting, the home stretch, when those tomatoes and peppers are setting fruit and you want real size and sweetness out of them. Now you lean on the yeast brew, because that's your feed. And this is the biggest meal of the whole season. This is when a fruiting tomato plant is pulling hard, and a steady, gentle yeast feed every week or so, with that potassium coming from the wood ash, supports the fruit as it swells. You still work a JMS drench in here and there to hold the soil life steady, But the yeast is the headliner now. Let me make all of that concrete with 3 plants you very likely got in the ground right now. For tomatoes, JMS in the bed 2 weeks before planting, JMS again to water them in on transplant day. Then alternate the 2 brews every couple of weeks right through the summer, and shift to a weekly yeast feed the moment those flowers turn into little green fruit. For peppers, almost the same rhythm, but peppers are slower and steadier customers, so go easy. A drench every 2 to 3 weeks is plenty. Peppers that get overfed will hand you lush green leaves and surprisingly shy fruit. For cucumbers, these are the hungry, fast ones, the real sprinters of the garden. They'll happily take a feed more often. And here's a nice bit of evidence to lean on. In published research, a scientist named Karajay tested baker's yeast on cucumbers and found it both promoted growth and helped the plants shrug off a common root pest. So cucumbers are a perfect place to let the yeast brew show what it can do. A quick word on how much, since people always ask. For a good drench, think roughly a ½ gallon to a gallon around the base of a big plant like a tomato, or 1 full watering can spread across a bed of smaller ones. You're trying to moisten the whole root zone, not flood it. When in doubt, a little less is fine. You'll be back in a week or 2 anyway. And don't forget your leafy crops and your herbs in all this. Your lettuces, your spinach, your basil and parsley. They love this gentle, steady kind of feeding, just kept on the lighter side. A weak yeast drench every couple of weeks keeps them tender and growing, without pushing them so hard they turn bitter or run to seed early. And here is the long game, the part that quietly pays you back over years instead of weeks. That first season, you'll be brewing and drenching fairly often. But because the microbial bucket is genuinely rebuilding the living soil, rather than just feeding the plant and leaving, that soil grows richer and more self-sufficient season after season. By the 2nd or 3rd year, a lot of gardeners find they can ease right off, fewer drenches, less brewing, because the ground has finally started doing the work on its own. You're no longer on a treadmill, buying the same bag every single spring. You're building something that needs you a little less each year. And that, right there, is the whole difference between renting your garden's health and owning it. Give it that first month of steady, patient attention. The bed prep, the transplant, those early alternating drenches, and you'll feel the whole thing start to carry its own momentum. Healthy soil makes for healthy plants, and healthy plants ask for a lot less rescuing. Now let me save you the mistakes, because the people who fail at this almost always fail in the very same handful of ways, and every single one of them is easy to sidestep once you know it's coming. The first one is completely invisible, and it's the reason a lot of careful gardeners can't work out why their brew came out flat. It's your tap water. Most city water is treated to kill microbes, which is wonderful for drinking, and terrible for a brew whose entire purpose is to grow microbes. Think about that for a second. You're trying to raise a whole crew of living organisms in water that was specifically designed to kill them. Now, the old advice is to let your water sit out overnight, and that genuinely does work, for chlorine, which simply gases off into the air within about a day. But here's the catch that almost nobody mentions. Many water systems have switched to a tougher cousin called chloramine, and chloramine does not gas off. You can let that water sit for a week, and it'll still be working against your brew. The fixes, thankfully, are simple. Use rainwater if you possibly can. It's free and just about perfect for this. If you're on city water, a tiny pinch of plain vitamin C powder stirred in will neutralize chloramine in seconds, or a cheap dechlorinator from the pet fish aisle does the very same job. One quick phone call to your local water utility tells you which one you're even dealing with. This single thing, getting the chlorine or the chloramine out of your water first, quietly decides whether your brew thrives or fizzles. It's the most overlooked step there is. The second mistake is the foam that just never shows up. If your JMS is still sitting there flat after 2 or 3 days, it's almost always one of 2 things. Either the brew is too cold, microbes turn sluggish in the chill, so a cold spring snap can stall the whole thing. Or your water killed the starter, which lands us right back on chlorine. Move the bucket somewhere warmer. Make sure your water is clean, and most flat batches will come right back to life. Which brings up temperature, and a mindset that will serve you better than any thermometer ever could. Read the season, not the clock. These brews are alive, so they move at the speed of warmth. In the cool of early spring, just give them an extra day or two. They're not broken. They're only working slowly. In the heat of midsummer, you get the opposite problem. The yeast brew especially can run away from you and turn sour in a matter of hours instead of finishing overnight. So in hot weather, check it sooner. You're not following a stopwatch. You're watching a living thing and meeting it where it is. The third mistake is the one that actually harms your plants, so hear me clearly on this. More is not better. The single fastest way to damage a plant with either of these brews is to mix them too strong, figuring you'll get quicker results. A concentrated brew poured straight onto roots can scorch them, which is the exact opposite of everything you're trying to do. The right way is gentle and regular. A properly diluted brew, applied steadily over time, beats a strong one applied in a panic every single time. And if you ever catch a whiff of sour vinegar coming off your brew, or notice little fruit flies starting to gather around the bucket, that's just a sign you've left too much sugar feeding it for too long. Use it promptly, keep it loosely covered, and don't let it sit and ferment past its prime. There's a quieter fourth mistake, and it's an easy one to make in good faith. Pouring your brew onto bone-dry soil. When the ground is baked hard and dusty, a lot of what you pour just runs off the surface and away, and the little that does soak in hits stressed, thirsty roots all at once. Give the bed a plain drink of water first, let it soften, then follow with your brew. It soaks in evenly and gently, right where you want it. And one more about expectations, because this is what helps you actually stick with it. Don't stand over your plants the next morning hunting for some overnight transformation. This isn't that kind of thing. You're building soil and feeding steadily, and the real change shows up over 2 or 3 weeks, and across the whole season, in steadier growth, better color, and fruit that just keeps coming. Patience is part of the recipe, little and often. Honestly, that's the entire discipline right there. And a couple of quick pro tips, once you're comfortable. If you want to brew a bigger batch, you can. Just scale everything up evenly and give it a stir now and then. And these brews work hand in hand with a good mulch on top of your soil, which keeps all that new microbial life cool, damp, and fed. The brew builds the life. The mulch keeps it alive. And if you've brewed more than you can use up, don't just pour it down the drain. A splash of leftover JMS tipped onto your compost pile gives the whole heap a jolt of microbial life and helps it break down faster. Nothing here ever needs to go to waste. Now, I want to be completely straight with you about something, because honesty is the whole point of this channel, and because, oddly enough, it puts you in a stronger position, not a weaker one. You'll hear these two methods talked about as if they're proven beyond all doubt, with big promises of doubled or even tripled harvests. So here's the real picture. The yeast research is genuinely encouraging. There are published studies showing better growth and better yield. But a fair bit of it comes from smaller trials, and honestly, our backyard version adds wood ash and Epsom and eggshell on top, so it's genuinely hard to say how much of the credit belongs to the yeast itself and how much to those added minerals. As for the Korean microbial bucket, its biggest, best documented benefit is that faster root settlement after transplant we already talked about. The grander claims you'll see floating around online, that it cures this, that it triples that, have surprisingly little solid independent research behind them so far. Now, the underlying idea is rock-solid soil science. A thriving community of microbes really does crowd out the troublemakers and help plants flourish. That part is not in doubt. It's just that the loudest promises have run out well ahead of the proof. So why am I telling you this, instead of just selling you the dream? Because it hands you the single most useful tool in all of gardening, and it costs you absolutely nothing. The controlled test. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone's. This season, leave one row, or one bed, or even just 2 pots side by side, completely untreated. Treat everything else with the brews. Then watch, with your own eyes, on your own soil, in your own weather. Your garden will quietly tell you the truth that no video and no fancy label ever can. And because the whole thing costs about $1, you can run that little experiment without risking a single thing. If you do run that test, do yourself one small favor. Scratch the date onto a little wooden label, or snap a photo on your phone every couple of weeks. Memory plays tricks on us in a garden. Everything always looks like it's doing well in hindsight. The label and the photo don't let you fool yourself. And while you're weighing it up, weigh the cost too, because this is really where it all lands. A full season of commercial microbial inoculants and bottled biostimulants can run you $30, $40, $50 and well up. Your 2 buckets cost you a potato, a handful of forest soil, a spoonful of yeast, and a few odds and ends you were already throwing away. Even if these brews only do part of what the loudest voices claim for them, they're doing it for pocket change, and they're rebuilding your soil the entire time. That kind of math is a hard thing to argue with. At the end of all of it, this was never really about yeast, or potatoes, or buckets. It's about quietly handing the work back to the living soil and trusting it to do what it's done for far longer than any of us have been around to garden. Good ground doesn't ask for much. It asks for a little attention, a little patience, and the plain good sense to get out of its way. Give it those 3 things, start with a single bucket this week, and then come back and tell me what your garden did.